1944. The Oval Office. The Second World War was reaching its most violent phase. Europe was burning, the Pacific was soaked in blood, and every decision made inside the White House carried enormous weight. President Franklin D. Roosevelt sat behind his desk, calmly dictating a letter to his secretary, unaware that he was about to witness one of the strangest demonstrations of secret warfare in American history. Standing behind the president was William Wild Bill Donovan. He was not a general in the traditional sense. He was something far more unusual. Donovan was the head of the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, America's first true intelligence agency, created to fight a war that could not be won openly. According to Stanley Lovell, the OSS Deputy Director of Research and Development, Donovan quietly raised a pistol behind the president. He pulled the trigger. Once. Then again. Then again. The magazine was emptied. Roosevelt did not stop speaking. He did not flinch. He did not turn around. He showed no sign that he had heard anything unusual. Only when Donovan spoke did the president pause. Roosevelt turned his head, confused. Lovell later wrote that the president's expression changed slowly, from confusion to surprise and finally to fascination. Roosevelt asked to see the weapon. The pistol in Donovan's hand was a high-standard HDM, one of the most secret firearms ever produced by the United States during the Second World War. Whether this event happened exactly as Lovell described is impossible to prove. OSS records were deliberately vague, and many were destroyed after the war. But the story itself reveals an important truth. The HDM was designed to fire without being noticed. It was not meant for the battlefield. It was not meant for soldiers. It was built for assassins, saboteurs, and agents operating deep behind enemy lines. A war fought in the shadows. Before 1941, the United States had no organization designed to conduct large-scale covert warfare. That changed after Pearl Harbor. The OSS was created to handle missions the regular military could not. Its agents were dropped into Nazi-occupied Europe, fascist-controlled territories, and Japanese-held islands. They worked with resistance groups, destroyed supply lines, stole enemy plans, and removed individuals who threatened Allied operations. For these agents, silence was everything. A single loud gunshot could alert an entire garrison. One mistake could expose a resistance network built over months. One sound could mean torture, execution, and failure. The OSS needed weapons that could kill without revealing the killer. Why normal guns failed? The OSS already had pistols in its armories. Colt Woodsman .22 caliber pistols were widely available, and some had suppressors designed in the 1920s by Maxim. These suppressors helped, but they were not enough. To understand why, you need to understand how a gun makes noise. A gunshot has three sources of sound. First is the muzzle blast. When the bullet leaves the barrel, hot, high-pressure gases explode into the air. Second is the sonic crack. If the bullet travels faster than sound, it creates a sharp cracking noise that can be heard far away. Third is mechanical noise. In semi-automatic pistols, the slide slams backward, the empty casing ejects, and the spring snaps everything forward again. Metal hits metal. That sound travels. Early suppressors only reduced muzzle blast. They did nothing to stop the slide. In quiet streets, stairwells, or courtyards, that mechanical noise was often louder than the gunshot itself. For close-quarters missions, this made suppressed pistols dangerous to use. Defeating physics. To make a pistol truly quiet, all three sources of noise had to be controlled. The OSS already had one advantage. Subsonic ammunition. The .22 long rifle cartridge travels below the speed of sound. That meant no sonic crack. But the muzzle blast and mechanical noise remained. That was the real problem. The British solution, and its limits. The British had already faced this challenge. Their Special Operations Executive, or SOE, developed a weapon called the well rod. The well rod was bolt action. No slide. No automatic movement. No mechanical noise. It was incredibly quiet. But it came with serious drawbacks. Only one shot at a time. Slow reloading. Two-handed operation. For missions involving a single target, it was perfect. For missions involving multiple enemies or sudden danger, it could get the operator killed. American intelligence needed something different. They needed silence and speed. Stanley Lovell's unusual idea. Stanley Lovell believed innovation did not always come from military engineers. Instead of designing a new pistol from scratch, he looked for something that already worked. He found it at High Standard Manufacturing in New Haven, Connecticut. High Standard produced accurate .22 target pistols used for military training. The pistol was reliable, accurate, and proven. Now it needed to disappear when fired. But High Standard did not design suppressors. So Lovell turned to a company no one expected. A company that had never built a firearm. A company whose expertise was sound itself. Why Bell Labs made sense. Bell Labs engineers spent decades studying how sound waves moved through air, metal, and enclosed spaces. They understood echo, vibration, pressure, and noise reduction better than anyone in the world. Their job was to make voices clearer over long distances. Lovell's job was to make gunshots disappear. The problem was different. The science was the same. In early 1943, Bell Labs received a classified contract to design a suppressor system for an OSS pistol. Everything about the project was secret. No patents were filed. No public documents were created. The names of the engineers were never recorded. This was wartime intelligence work. Individual credit did not matter. Results did. A different approach to silencing. Most suppressors at the time followed a simple idea. Attach a tube to the end of the barrel. Let the gases expand inside it. Hope the noise drops enough. Bell Labs engineers knew this was not enough. To truly reduce sound, gas pressure had to be lowered before the bullet exited the muzzle. That required changing the pistol itself. The integral suppressor. Instead of designing a detachable suppressor, Bell Labs created an integral suppressor. This meant the suppressor was built directly into the pistol. It could not be removed in the field. It could not be lost. It could not be assembled incorrectly. Reliability was critical for covert operations. The barrel of the pistol was modified with small holes, known as ports. As the bullet traveled down the barrel, some of the expanding gas escaped through these ports into the suppressor body. By the time the bullet reached the muzzle, much of the pressure was already gone. This alone reduced the muzzle blast significantly. But Bell Labs went further. Inside the suppressor. The suppressor had two main chambers. The first chamber surrounded the ported section of the barrel. It was packed with zinc-plated bronze mesh. This mesh absorbed heat from the hot gases. It slowed them down. It reduced their energy. The second chamber contained layers of bronze wire screens and stacked baffles. These broke the gas into smaller streams. They cooled it further. They delayed its release into the air. By the time the gas finally exited the suppressor, it was no longer explosive. It drifted out quietly. But even with perfect gas control, one major problem remained. The mechanical noise problem. Semi-automatic pistols make noise even if no bullet is fired. The slide moves backward. The casing ejects. The recoil spring snaps forward. Metal strikes metal. In a silent room, this sound is obvious. Bell Labs could not change physics, but they could change how the pistol was used. The slide lock, the key feature. The HDM included a slide lock mechanism. When engaged, the slide was held firmly in place. The pistol would fire, but it would not cycle. No slide movement. No casing ejection. No spring noise. The pistol effectively became a single-shot weapon. After firing, the operator had to manually cycle the slide to load the next round. This feature gave OSS agents a choice. If speed mattered, they could fire semi-automatically. If silence mattered more, they could lock the slide. This flexibility made the HDM unique. Maximum silence techniques. OSS training manuals described ways to push the HDM even further. Agents were taught that the second chamber of the suppressor could be filled with a water, oil, a grease, a even shaving cream. These materials absorbed heat and slowed gas even more. In extreme cases, agents sealed the muzzle with tape before firing. The bullet punched through, but the tape delayed gas release just enough to reduce sound further. With the slide locked and the suppressor prepared, the loudest sound was often the bullet striking the target. This detail is important. It explains how Donovan's Oval Office demonstration could have worked. The finished weapon. High Standard Manufacturing modified their HD target pistol to accept the Bell Lab suppressor system. The finished weapon was designated the High Standard HDM. To hide its true purpose, production documents referred to it as an impact testing machine. The pistol was large, almost 14 inches long, nearly 3 pounds when loaded. It used a 10-round detachable magazine firing .22 long rifle ammunition. It was single action only. The hammer had to be cocked for the first shot. This was not a soldier's pistol. It was a tool for specialists. A weapon built for secrecy. By late 1943, production began. The HDM was not mass-produced like rifles or machine guns. Only a few thousand would ever exist. Each one was meant for a specific mission, carried by a specific person, operating far from friendly forces. Bell Labs returned to making phones work better. High Standard returned to building target pistols. But the weapon they created together was about to be used in places no history book would openly describe. Area B, where secrets were made. OSS training did not take place at famous military bases. It happened in quiet, hidden locations. One of the most important was Area B, located in the woods of Maryland. Years later, this site would become known as Camp David. To outsiders, Area B looked unremarkable. To OSS agents, it was where survival was learned. The House of Horrors. Inside Area B stood a building known as the Pistol House, often called the House of Horrors. It was designed to feel confusing and dangerous. Rooms were narrow. Lighting was poor. Targets appeared suddenly. The purpose was simple. Agents had to learn to react without hesitation. In real operations, hesitation meant death. A different philosophy of shooting. Traditional marksmanship was not useful here. Slow breathing. Careful sight alignment. Taking time to aim. All of that was rejected. OSS instructors believed real combat was fast, chaotic, and close. Two men shaped this philosophy more than anyone else. Lieutenant Colonel Rex Applegate, an OSS officer, and William Fairbairn, a British close combat expert who had trained police in Shanghai. Their method was called instinctive shooting. The idea was simple. Point the weapon like an extension of your arm. Fire immediately. Keep moving. The HDM was perfect for this style. Learning to use the HDM. Agents were taught every feature of the HDM. They learned how the suppressor worked, how to maintain it, how to recognize when it was wearing out. But the most important lesson involved the slide lock. Instructors demonstrated the difference. First, they fired the pistol normally. The slide moved. The casing ejected. The sound was noticeable. Then they locked the slide. The difference was dramatic. The shot was almost impossible to hear from a distance. Agents were trained to decide, in seconds, which mode to use. Silence or speed. Practicing silence. Agents practiced firing with the slide locked until the motion became natural. Fire. Pause. Manually cycle the slide. Fire again. This was slower, but incredibly quiet. In certain missions, that silence mattered more than anything else. Agents were also trained to prepare the suppressor for maximum effectiveness. They learned how to add water or oil, how to seal the muzzle with tape, how to avoid overfilling and damaging the weapon. Every detail mattered. The role of the .22 caliber. Many new agents questioned the caliber. The .22 long rifle seemed small. Instructors addressed this directly. At close range, shot placement mattered more than power. A .22 round placed into the brainstem or upper spine was immediately lethal, and it did not produce the blast and flash of larger calibers. OSS doctrine was clear. This was not about firefights. It was about control, effective range and use. OSS manuals considered the HDM effective from contact distance out to roughly 50 feet. Beyond that, accuracy and lethality dropped. But most clandestine encounters happened closer. Doorways, stairwells, small rooms. This was the environment the HDM was built for. Deployment into occupied territory. By mid-1944, HDMs were being issued to agents deployed across the world. Europe, the Mediterranean, The Far East. British SOE units received them through shared supply channels. French resistance fighters were trained to use them. Jedburgh teams, small three-man groups made up of American, British, and local personnel, parachuted into occupied France with HDMs in their kits. These teams operated independently, coordinating resistance efforts and disrupting German control. Why records are scarce. Precise details of HDM use are rare. This was intentional. OSS operations were designed to leave no trace. Successful missions produced no reports. Only failures created paperwork. As a result, much of what the HDM did will never be known. And that was the point. The weapon earns trust. Within the OSS, the HDM developed a reputation. It worked. It was reliable. It was accurate. It was quiet when used correctly. Agents trusted it. And in covert operations, trust in your equipment meant survival. As the war in Europe came to an end, many assumed the HDM would disappear with it. They were wrong. The end of the OSS, and a new beginning. In September 1945, President Truman officially dissolved the OSS. For a brief time, America had no centralized intelligence service. But the lessons of World War II were impossible to ignore. Covert action, espionage, and secret warfare were now permanent tools of state power. In 1947, the Central Intelligence Agency was created. Along with files, networks, and experienced personnel, the CIA inherited the OSS equipment stockpiles. Among them were the HDM pistols. Production had ended. Replacement parts were limited. But the weapons still worked, and there was nothing better to replace them. A different kind of war. The Cold War was not fought with front lines and declarations. It was fought in shadows. Intelligence officers operated in hostile cities, border regions, jungles, and mountains. Small teams conducted reconnaissance, sabotage, and prisoner snatch operations. Silence was still critical. In many of these missions, a loud gunshot could trigger international incidents rather than battlefield alarms. The HDM remained relevant. Used during the Korean War. When the Korean War began in 1950, the CIA supported paramilitary teams operating near the demilitarized zone and behind North Korean lines. Information about these missions remains classified or fragmentary. But declassified documents confirm that suppressed weapons were issued to intelligence personnel. The HDM, already proven and familiar, continued to be used. Its small caliber was not ideal for combat, but these missions were not about firefights. They were about quiet control. Vietnam, a perfect environment. If any environment suited the HDM, it was Vietnam. The jungle created close-range encounters. Visibility was limited. Sound carried strangely. Enemy forces could be anywhere. Special operations and intelligence teams operated deep in contested territory. Reconnaissance patrols. Capture missions. Targeted eliminations. In these situations, silence mattered more than power. The HDM was used alongside other suppressed weapons, but it remained valued for its reliability and simplicity. The U-2 incident, proof of long service. The most famous documented example of HDM use occurred in 1960. On May 1st, American U-2 reconnaissance pilot Francis Gary Powers was shot down over Soviet territory. The U-2 program was one of the most secret intelligence efforts of the Cold War. Flying above 70,000 feet, these aircraft photographed Soviet military installations. Pilots carried survival kits in case they were forced down. Inside Powers' kit was a high-standard HDM. The pistol was intended for survival and evasion, a last resort if the pilot needed to escape or defend himself behind enemy lines. Powers was captured. So was the pistol. The Soviets recognized its significance immediately. That HDM remains on display today at the Central Armed Forces Museum in Moscow. It is physical proof that the weapon was still trusted 15 years after World War II. A security breach at home. Not all HDM history is secret. One major security failure happened during the war itself. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, received an HDM as a personal gift from William Donovan. In November 1944, a photograph appeared in the Philadelphia Inquirer showing Nimitz and his son firing the pistol. The image revealed a weapon that was supposed to remain classified. It showed the tension surrounding the HDM. It was fascinating. It was impressive. People wanted to show it off. But secrecy demanded silence. Limitations of the HDM. Despite its success, the HDM was not perfect. The suppressor was a consumable component. After roughly 200 to 250 rounds, the bronze mesh inside degraded. Performance dropped. Replacing the mesh required specialized work and parts that were increasingly hard to obtain. This was not a weapon for sustained combat. It was a precision tool for specific missions. Failed replacements. In the late 1960s, efforts were made to replace the original Bell Labs suppressor. Frankfurt Arsenal developed a new design. On paper, it seemed like an improvement. In practice, it was heavier, bulkier, and less effective. The original Bell Labs design remained superior. Sometimes, the first solution is the best one. Most weapons are designed around power. Bigger bullets. Louder explosions. More damage. The HDM was built around control. Control of sound. Control of movement. Control of situations that could collapse with a single mistake. This was not a gun for courage. It was a gun for discipline. Before World War II, suppressed weapons were rare and experimental. After the HDM, silence became a tactical choice. Military planners realized something important. Not every problem needed force. Some problems needed discretion. The HDM proved that a suppressed handgun could be reliable, accurate, and operationally useful. That lesson never disappeared. Modern suppressed pistols owe much to the HDM. Threaded barrels. Integrated suppressor concepts. Focus on subsonic ammunition. These ideas were refined later, but the foundation was laid during the 1940s. Even modern special forces still train for quiet, controlled engagements, a direct descendant of OSS doctrine. Many people assume older weapons vanish when new technology appears. That did not happen with the HDM. Why? Because it worked. It was simple. It was predictable. It did not surprise its user. In covert operations, surprises are dangerous. Agents trusted the HDM because it behaved the same way every time. The HDM did more than eliminate targets. It protected missions. A loud shot could expose an agent. Expose a network. Expose a country's involvement. Silence prevented escalation. In the Cold War, that silence may have prevented conflicts far larger than any single mission. The cost of silence. Using the HDM required responsibility. A suppressed weapon makes killing easier. That truth was understood by OSS instructors. Agents were trained not just how to fire, but when not to fire. Restraint was part of the doctrine. This was not about chaos. It was about control. Today, original HDM pistols are rare. Complete examples with intact suppressors can sell for extremely high prices. Collectors value them not for their power, but for their story. Each scratch suggests a mission. Each worn part hints at secrecy. It is a weapon surrounded by questions, and that makes it fascinating. The HDM now rests in museums and private collections. Behind glass, it looks harmless. But its history reminds us how close power and secrecy can be. Technology does not decide morality. People do. The HDM simply obeyed. In an age of drones, satellites, and cyber warfare, the HDM might seem irrelevant. But its lesson still applies. Sometimes the most powerful action is the one no one notices. Sometimes silence changes history more than noise. The high-standard HDM did not shape history by being loud. It shaped history by being invisible. And that is why it will always be remembered, even if most of its missions never will be. If you enjoyed this deep dive into hidden military history, and if you like stories about weapons that change the world quietly, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who loves real history. More unseen stories are waiting.